Hello, and welcome back to Ask Dr. B. So, even if you're not closely following the Johnny Depp Amber Heard trial, you've probably seen reference to it. It was, in our paper on Sunday, on social media. You're probably seeing comments about it. And as you can probably guess, I'm not going to talk about the trial. I wasn't there. I don't know the specifics and the details, and it's a lot of, experts and witnesses, and I hope that the parties involved get resolution, because one thing that is absolutely clear, this was a very unhealthy relationship, a destructive relationship. And if there was abuse, then that needs to be accounted for and addressed. So I'm not taking away from the importance of the process, but in terms of what I want to talk about, I want to talk about something that I hope this trial really elevates, and that is the need for us to talk about destructive relationships, how to recognize them, and most importantly, how to get out of them. So I'm going to do it in two parts. This first video, I want to talk about how we find ourselves in them and what may keep us in them. And in the second video, I want to talk about and how do we get out of them. In a few weeks, I'm going to do an entire series on domestic violence because it's such a big issue. Not all destructive, unhealthy, or toxic relationships are domestic violence. They're not all violent. If it is a violent relationship, obviously that has all of its own sort of elements and components and danger. But destructive relationships that are not violent can be equally destructive and actually deadly. People often, reach such points of despair that they either attempt to take their own life or they do. So these are very serious, and it's important to talk about them, or to think about them for our well-being and the well-being of people we love. So how do we get ourselves into these relationships? And you notice I say, how do we get ourselves? We often feel to blame for being in it. How could I be so stupid? How could I fall in for that? How come I didn't see? Why didn't I recognize the signs? And that's understandable because, we like to be in control and we like to feel like we're our own, agent of change. But man, our emotions, they make everything complicated. If it was just an intellectual decision, that'd be one thing, but these are much more emotionally driven. So it could be that the relationship starts out and feels amazing. It feels like, wow, there's such, intensity and passion, mutual need for each other, almost feels desperate. All of that can feel initially pretty heady. But if we unpack that a little bit, those things are not particularly what you want in a balanced relationship over time. It's great to have that initial, falling in love and can't wait to see the other person. But passion is not the same as volatility. And sometimes early on, even, you can look back and say, wow, there was intense passion, but then there were these sort of depths of despair or, these wicked fights and confusing, and I don't understand. And so it may start out feeling really powerful. Sometimes I talk about it with people like it's a tractor beam, pulling us into this relationship because there's so much intensity, so much emotionality. And so that, it's just something to watch for in the early stages of a relationship. You may feel like, I've never experienced anything like this. And again, that could be pretty powerful and good. But if it also feels like it's sort of wild and out of control, bordering on chaos, that's not good. And if, again, there's this, up and down experience, especially when on the downside, there's either a sense of that the person's, on the other side of this equation, there's desperation or intense neediness or despair, and that you're responsible for pumping them up or keeping them up, that signals that something is not healthy, not good. It could be that you've never felt, like someone needed you in this way. And again, that can be lovely and powerful, but that doesn't mean that it's healthy. And so keep an eye on that. You should be able to be head over heels and intoxicated in the positive, but also be able to step away and have the rest of the things that are going on in your life and other relationships. You should feel safe in the relationship, safe to be yourself, safe to be honest, safe to share what's going on with friends and family. And if you don't, that typically is a sign that something is not as it should be. So we get into it, maybe we don't see it for what it is. Maybe we were vulnerable at the time. Maybe we're just coming out of a relationship that maybe was sad or disappointing or not the greatest. And so we may be vulnerable to that. We may have experienced some other blow to our self-esteem. And so we may be a little vulnerable in that respect as well. Sometimes people say, well, there's no violence. The relationship isn't violent, physically violent. So it's not, abusive. So are all destructive relationships violent? No, but that doesn't mean it's not destructive. If it is destructive, if it is violent, then that again falls into another category, and that's really dangerous. But it might be emotionally or sexually violent or abusive. You may feel that you're, beaten up emotionally, torn down, only sometimes to be picked up and adored and treated like a king or a queen. That's concerning too. Or sexually, you may feel like you're no longer, it's no longer reciprocal. You may feel like that the sexual part of the relationship is being either demanded or in some way you're feeling mistreated or degraded. All of that is really important to pay attention to. It may be that it's a very different show to the public than what's happening in private. So if when you're out in public together, this person treats you so well and just everybody's saying, oh my gosh, you are so fortunate to have this person who adores you and loves you and treats you so well. But in private, that's not the case, or it's a mixed bag at best. That's concerning. But again, it's powerful. It makes it very difficult when you start to think, what is going on here? Okay, so now I'm sort of shifting into, and I just want to touch on some other indicators. So I said, how you might get into it. You may not see it coming. It may feel really great in the beginning. It may sort of start to change over time. Also, you may be being blamed for what's happening when it's not good. So it started out great, but then when things go south, you're blamed. It's because of you, because you let them down, or because you didn't do something you should have done, or because of X, Y, Z, whatever. And you don't ever, have a sense that, wow, we're working through anything. The other could be the case too, that when it crashes, the other person is filled with guilt, remorse. They're such a worthless person, and you're required to lift them up and boost them up and fill them up. And so then if you don't, there's something wrong with you. You don't love them enough. You don't care about them enough. But you can hear how this just can do a number on someone's thinking about themselves and the relationship and the other person. There are also some other sort of hallmark indicators, to look for. One is a sense of control. That are you feeling like you are being controlled, either because the person is obsessive or jealous or incredibly needy or all of the above. And so you feel like you are constantly explaining yourself, explaining your actions, explaining where you're going. Is the person tracking you, making you, if you go out with friends, you have to text multiple times, or they're following your Instagram posts or your other social media? That's concerning, alarming. Is there this sense of dishonesty that you're being lied to, deceived? And then when you confront it or you ask about it, it's turned on you again, so that it's about you and why don't you ever believe them? And here's why they had to lie to you. All these are very concerning signs. And if these are familiar to you, and it doesn't, I'm portraying it as an extreme case. I always say to people, is it more good than bad? A lot more good than bad. So it may not be that it's horrible all the time, but when it's bad, how bad is it? When it's bad, do you feel these things? And because of that, in general, you don't talk about it honestly with other people because you can't talk about these other things that are so bad. You may feel that this other person can't function without you. So again, there's sort of a control because they need you so much that you can't breathe, and you're afraid that they will either do something destructive, or maybe they tell you they're going to do something harmful to themselves if you leave. There may be hostility, degradation, harassment of you. And again, it may be all in private. So you don't see it when you're out, but it may be when you're out in public too, or maybe when you're at a restaurant, how you're treated. And so it starts to make you feel bad about yourself. Plus you're already probably feeling bad about yourself, that you're stuck in some way, confused about what's happening. You may be feeling intimidated. There may be, if not a actual threat of violence, a fear of violence, again, toward you or to themselves. Or you may feel emotionally intimidated, that they just pound you relentlessly when you try to, be yourself or try to be autonomous or independent. And that's a concerning sign too. Okay, so we talked a lot about how you might find yourself in it, what it might look like and feel like when you're in it. And so the last piece I want to touch on in this first segment of this two-part discussion of destructive and toxic relationships is, you may be asking yourself, why am I still here? Yes, this sounds like me, and this sounds like what happens. And I know it's unhealthy, and I know it's toxic, and maybe it's not physically violent, but man, it feels bad more of the time, much more of the time than good. Why am I still here? So if you've been tracking the trial at all, you've heard reference to the impact of trauma, early trauma, and how it affects our ability to have relationships with ourselves, as well as relationships with others. So if you come from trauma that you've experienced, it may make you more vulnerable to this kind of situation. Does that mean that anyone who's ever experienced trauma is doomed to have an unhealthy, destructive, toxic relationship? Absolutely not. Does that mean that if you're in a bad relationship now that is destructive and you come from trauma, that you're doomed to repeat that over and over again? Absolutely not. And even if you are the victimizer, if you are the person who is toxic, who is destructive, and you come from trauma, which you probably do, does this mean that you are always going to be in that role or in the role of being mistreated yourself? No. We have great capacity for healing and change. But as I'll talk about in the next video, you got to take the steps. You got to be active. You got to acknowledge what's going on. So, okay, trauma. I mentioned self-esteem. If we have low self-esteem, if we don't feel good about ourselves, if we haven't experienced being built up or loved or taken care of, maybe we haven't experienced many relationships at all. Maybe we're young in this experience of relationships, and you're not used to. You don't know what to expect. But for whatever reason, you don't feel strong enough or good enough to say, this isn't okay. Maybe you feel like you deserve to be treated this way, again, either because of trauma or because your self-esteem is poor. Maybe you're being told it is your fault, that all of this is your fault. And you're being told it in ways and so often and repeatedly, and all these other elements are here. Maybe you believe that, but it's not. No one deserves to be mistreated. No one deserves to be belittled, degraded. No one deserves to be hurt physically, sexually, emotionally. We can all say harsh things when we're upset, but that's one thing that couples resolve and work through and say, I'm sorry, and move through that. What we're talking about today is something very, very different and important to recognize. But I do want to add here, that's a good, I think, place to insert. One of the reasons we stay in relationships is we may feel ashamed and embarrassed, not only of what the actions are by the other person, but also if there are things that we are doing or have done that we feel bad about, that we feel ashamed of. So we are afraid to leave because of all those bad feelings. But I guarantee once you get out and can breathe again, you can heal and you can look at your own behavior in the relationship and make different choices going forward. You may be afraid to tell your family, tell your friends, because either they've been seeing it and have been saying, you need to get out, and and you haven't. And so they're like, feeling, I'm not going to keep telling you. I can only tell you so much. So you may feel like afraid to say to them, yes, I see, I needed to do this and I couldn't before. Or they may think that this other person is the greatest thing. And how are you going to explain what's really been happening? But again, take that step. We'll talk about that more in the next video. You may be afraid because you're physically intimidated. There's a real threat or a assumed threat of violence. And obviously that's alarming and concerning. And check out some of the resources that I have here to help you with that. There's another reason why a lot of people in these kinds of relationships stay. There's a desperate wish that the person would see them the way they at one point acted like they saw them, in the beginning when things were good. There's a hope, a wish that the person will see, no, it's not all about me. You contributed. This part was you, or you hurt me. That wish, that desire to get them to recognize their contribution. Unfortunately, often in these situations, that is just not going to happen. And it's hard to let go. It's hard to let go of that wish to have it be the way it was. It's hard to let go of that wish that they see you accurately. We all want to be seen accurately and valued. But if you're in a relationship that sounds like some of these things, more often than not, it's likely it is not going to happen. You may not have the resources to leave. That's another thing that happens. Sometimes these people pull us in and we become dependent in ways where we don't financially have the resources, we don't emotionally have the resources. Maybe we've cut off other relationships or they've cut them off, so we're alone. That makes it difficult to leave too. But it's possible. There are programs and shelters and resources for everyone to get the help that you need. It's hard, but make the step. Everyone, whether you're in a relationship that's a week old, a year old, or a decade old, that sounds like this, I hope that this video and maybe some of the things you've seen and heard will help you take that step to leave and get the help and support that you deserve. No one deserves to be mistreated. Thank you for watching. I'm going to put out another video, as I said, focused on how some of the things to think about to help you leave if you are in a situation like this. I hope that's helpful to you too. And please share these videos with others if you find them useful, because there's a lot of pain and suffering. The best way we can address it is get people the help, the resources they need, tell them what's useful to us so that they can build strength and find their way to a healthy life. Thank you so much.